Trump dispatched Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the heads of his Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to Capitol Hill today to talk with lawmakers about slashing the size of the government.
We're just talking about the art of the possible, kind of the metes and bounds of things that we can do quickly, things that will take a longer time.
Florida Congressman Jared Moskowitz became the first Democrat to join the DOGE caucus.
Democrats should embrace government efficiency. That doesn't mean that we're going to start cutting services, but I think it can be more efficient.
We know that today Elon Musk, Little X, and Vivek Ramaswamy are now on the Hill. They're getting to work on DOGE. I believe that the DOGE caucus, however that works, it's got some senators, it's got some congressmen. They're all going to be working together on the Hill, supposedly, with Vivek and Elon. We're going to see how that shakes out today. But Benz, let me ask you, man. So as a guy who has intimately become aware with the machinations of our government, as you like to call it, the blob, how do you go about fighting the blob? What do you think would be, I'll put it this way, what do you think would be the most effective thing to focus in on first, if there is any one key node?
Well, the nature of the blob is that it is so decentralized. But what
Yes.
if there is one key node immediately, just because of the sheer size of the funding that runs through it in terms of the funding of internet censorship capacities, is, a lot of people raise their eyebrows when I say this, but it's because they're expecting me to say the CIA or the FBI. But the fact is the National Science Foundation is actually the number one funder, especially on the domestic side of internet censorship. And the National Science Foundation, I encourage you when I say this and I walk you through these programs I'm about to lay out here, that you don't think of the National Science Foundation as being the name that comes to mind when you hear the phrase science. Now, the National Science Foundation is the civilian arm of DARPA. It is a defense-oriented civilian foundation. It's got a 15% mandatory quota in its charter for national security. DARPA this is essentially where dual-use military technology gets transferred over to the civilian commercial realm. So, for example, the internet itself was a DARPA creation, and then it was transferred over to the National Science Foundation for the rollout to civilians for the World Wide Web. Many such cases with this. And so the National Science Foundation is essentially a cover, in the same way that USAID is often for intelligence work, for the kind of civilian projects that the military wants to do but can't get caught doing, because it would look sick and twisted if the Pentagon was directly giving so much money to social media censorship projects targeting U.S. citizens. So instead, they walk down the street and get the National Science Foundation to do it. There's two programs that total about $100 million in pure funding for domestic social media censorship that can be cut right away and do an unbelievable amount of damage to the censorship beast. One of them is called the Secure Cyberspace, the Secure Trust in Cyberspace Program, which is a program to academic universities to do disinformation studies research. And this is tens of millions of dollars that go to a sprawling web of U.S. colleges and universities so that they can do full-time censorship work, mapping what you and I tweet about, pressuring social media companies to take our posts down, creating nudges in the algorithms in order to tune down the keywords or political ideas that we're expressing. To play mad scientist and to fine-tune the science of censorship. And that's every major university in the country right now is a grant through that National Science Foundation program. Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Brown, George Washington University, University of Washington, University of Texas, Austin, you name it. I mean, there's over 60 of these. And then there's also another National Science Foundation program called the Convergence Accelerator Track F program, which is a censorship program at the National Science Foundation, which doesn't just fund the research like the Secure Trust in Cyberspace program, but it actually funds AI technology tools that will do the censorship scanning and banning more efficiently, essentially funding the science of AI censorship. I actually played a few clips from that program on the Joe Rogan show this week. That company, that WiseDex clip about halfway through the interview was funded by the National Science Foundation's Track F program. And that's another several tens of millions of dollars in funding. So you knock out about $100 million of censorship military capital, essentially, in the same way that, the U.S. government sanctions foreign countries to economically cripple them, to stop their warfighting capacities in the context of a hot war. That's the mentality DOGE has to have about things like internet freedom. Every dollar that flows from the U.S. government to someone who's pledged to use that money to censor U.S. citizens, despite having ostensibly First Amendment protection, that should have been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, who completely goofed the Murphy, Missouri decision. So if we're not going to get that done by the Supreme Court, it should be done by the Supreme Doge.
And I love this. I think this is something too as well where, you're right. It's not even, something that anyone has on their radar. This National Science Foundation, that's, it's one of these independent agencies that sort of just sits out there this is basically the non-medical arm of what the NIH does. So it's the NIH for the other varieties of science. And what you're talking about, though, is essentially the link, right? This is the lifeblood of not just finance, but power. Not just financing, but actual power between the federal government and academia. And this is why you get these linkages between this public-private sphere that seems to exist, and they'll say, "Oh, no, the Stanford Internet Observatory or the former Shorenstein Center over at Harvard. We're not public entities, so we can provide censorship in a way that the government cannot." And yet, of course, they're receiving this level of federal funding, and people know that they are federally backed. This would essentially sever that link. I mean, you're cutting the umbilical cord between federal government and federal power and these private entities